Saji, hello. I hope that rain spa, like, I don't know where Jay finds that music, but it's like the bark off of some mystical tree somewhere that almost puts me to sleep. How are you? Where are we finding you today?
Well, great to be with you, Jenna. Thank you for making time to speak with me. The music reminded me of me being transported to Sri Lanka, tropical island, with you know
That needs
monsoon rains. But
introduction in my life or in my family. We just spent a couple weeks in Sri Lanka and I cannot wait to go back.
without me, without
I
me,
I'm embarrassed to say that I did not do a very good job of stacking the schedule or getting the right kind of piece of advice from experts like yourself, but I am absolutely in love with Sri Lanka.
well, that's hugely privileged
I
coming
can't
from
wait
you.
to go back but I'm also and tell me what you want me to do. I'm gonna take however you answer this question as like the
Mhm.
official Jenna behavior statement, recognizing there's many millions of Sri Lankans that have different opinions. But I'm not tagging any photos that I posted of Sri Lanka, I'm not tagging Sri Lanka because I have a thing about over touristed places where people are chasing Instagram posts.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I've not been tagging any of the places that I've been going because I don't want people to go. Want me to not tag it? Like, do you want the Americans not to come, or do you want all of our money?
I think we need both, all of those together. In some sense, it's I think good to tag and show people because the country has gone through tremendous economic hardship and is slowly coming building back up. It actually means more jobs for people, more opportunities to interact, and also in a world that is being divided more and more, we need more cultural exchanges. So in some sense, you need that exposure, and then you need the finances. I 100% get your issue around not tagging because tourism can cause so much damage. In Sri Lanka is another example of that as well. But on when you add up the pluses and minuses, I think the pluses are to promote because I know in Sri Lanka, which I just saw yesterday that Sri Lanka was the had the distinguished honor of being recognized as the most gorgeous island in the world or the prettiest island in the world. Some ranking yesterday that came out. So
Sorry, whose
they are
ranking was
promoting it.
it? Because I'm actually a
I
big fan of like the Jenna.com ranking that I believe this.
well,
I
that
I I lo I
standard is
love
the
when
gold
people
standard.
rank, but National Geographic ranked Bermuda one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, like the 7th most beautiful beach in the entire
Mhm.
world, and lo and behold, no one on the East Coast of the United States flies the hour to Bermuda.
Yeah.
But National Geographic, I take their rankings very I feel like they
Mhm.
absolutely are an authority on the subject, but I
100%.
really I really, 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 really loved Sri Lanka, and I loved that, I don't there weren't too many of us there yet.
I want more people to go and see this beautiful teardrop island. I want more people to see it and its people. And it's a small island where you get to see the wildlife, the tea plantations, the ancient civilizations, and the history of that, and the beautiful beaches, and not to mention the food and the spices and all that. You can't have all that in one small thing. So,
So I will say I was going intentionally on vacation. I always try to make sure that we do some cultural components, when we go to these places, and I was, blessed enough to be connected with your colleague, who lives in Colombo.
yeah.
Remind me of his name, it begins with an N.
Navas.
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 And I will take that opportunity to launch into the work that you're doing at Search for Common Ground, an organization that's working in over 33 different countries around the world, post mass violence, post genocide, stabilizing countries, preventing that kind of violence to begin with. They are doing God's work at a level of which is almost impossible to quantify, a fool's errand to try to. Unfortunately, when it comes to funding, we all have to jump through some of those hoops. But um, Search for Common Ground's work with Navaz at the tip of the spear really saved many lives in Sri Lanka. And as a recent tourist who was just there to like 4 or 5 days with my family while we were in Dubai, it was really hard for me to envision the stories of what had recently happened in Sri Lanka and the angst and the horror and how it seemed like such a place with such ancient history that it couldn't have so recently been in such turmoil. I am dangerous on the subject, but certainly not dangerous enough, and I would love for you to tell me as we continue to praise, and invite people to the beautiful island of Sri Lanka in the most respectful ways possible. They're gonna ban Instagram there if it's up to me, but if you could tell us a little bit about your beautiful country, and its recent history and some of the pride you have and how it's moved through it.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Jenna, for having me, but also thank you for visiting this country. I think you are visiting at an interesting time. There has been many turning points. Small country has gone through. When I say small in size, but not in population necessarily, but we've had many turning points to turn the clock, turn the page, and find ways that we
When I
can
say
get
small in
as a
size, but not in
multiple
population.
ethnic country. I'm hearing echo also in the back. Uh, a country that has gone through many turmoils. When you say recent, I can go back to 100 years is recent, and at the same time, 20 years is also recent, 10 years is also recent, or post pandemic is also recent. But some of those main turning points have been about how people have seen created enemies and tried to kill each other. And as I grew up in that small country, I got to see the really ugly side of human nature, the ability for people to kill your neighbor, murder them, torture them, burn their bodies, burn their houses, hack people to death. That's the ugly side. As a young boy growing up, I saw that. And at the same time, I saw the really good side of human nature too. People hiding their enemy, clothing them, safeguarding them, protecting them. And that story often gets hidden when with the bigger story of killing. And I think the story of caring for each other is very deeply cultural. You go to any village, actually, when you were there, if you actually went to a village and asked someone for some water or food, they will welcome you in, plan to go for 10 minutes, and plan to walk out 2 hours later at least, because the hospitality is there no matter which part of the country or the country you visit. So I think it's a country of juxtaposition of the ugly history and good history coming together and colliding, which in the recent past had an economic collapse of the economy. But the good story is how people came together, yeah, started by youth in the country, to say enough is enough with these broken promises, enough is enough with this corruption of leaders using our country and the name of our country to make profit from them, and saying we need to carve a new story. And the people came together and said no to the government governing regime, and ousted the regime because of that. But that's because of several pain points also. Pain points of, I was there when we had 12, 13, 15 hour, 20-hour power outages, no electricity, which means no food, very difficult to save food, no gas or petrol or to take to go anywhere. I've been in lines for 15 hours a day, 7 hours to 15 hours a day, waiting to get petrol to drive somewhere. So we had that, and those were the reasons why people stood up and said, "We want to take back our country." And the movement started by young people, brought the adults into the room, the teachers, associate unions, the doctors, the lawyers, all of them came to the streets. For the first time, people were seeing each other as Sri Lankans, not Tamil, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, but as Sri Lankans. And that was one of those most beautiful moments of people coming together and saying, we want to reclaim our country as our collective. And that, and when people use division to create divisions, people were saying there are no divisions among us. So even this, despite the ugly history, that was like almost using Sri Lanka, lotus flower. The lotus flower is a beautiful flower, but it grows in mud.
Yep.
Mud is dirt, right? And that example of a flower, the lotus flower is the good, right analogy for the country's people when they were growing up in the mud itself.
No Mud, No Lotus is a tattoo I have dated
Ah.
at many points of my life. I have a very low pain threshold, which is the primary reason I haven't actually gotten it across the finish line, but I really do appreciate it. Um, Saji, do you mind telling us a little bit about the division that was created, how it was fabricated? Um, when I hear you talk about stories of what neighbors were so willing to do to each other, it is sadly a story that I've heard so many times in different places around the world. I also believe that I've heard so many times that any door you knock on, someone's going to open it and welcome you in for water and food. I've experienced that in I think every country in the entire world. Actually, there's one, it's a European one. It's like at the top of the EU where the people weren't as friendly as I would have thought they would have been. But in every other place that I've been, people, that seems like it's just the human nature to do that. And yet also on the other side of it, there's something I certainly am in denial about, that is a place, a behavior set, a belief, a willingness to go to, that is very ugly. Would you mind? And Saji, I'm going to ask because I know that you are one of the most important peace builders in the entire world. But as you're explaining this, let's just assume most folks who are watching really need to be in the 101 stage in all of the language and definitions that you use. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the conflict and how it surfaced. And I would particularly love to also know if you see that type of conflict and tension and othering happening
Mhm.
in other places today.
Great question. Go to the heart of why we are even talking like this. Um, so, for example, in Sri Lanka, growing up, I grew up in a family with a loving family, and that is important. And I went to school with mixed group of people, all boys school. We don't have co-ed schools except in the villages. So we're growing up believing that all of us are equal. Our religions, I grew up in, my father was a Catholic, he's Catholic, my mother is Buddhist, so I was brought up with both influences of faith and religions.
Were they
I went to
both
Sun
religious?
They were both religious. My father was a Catholic brother when he met my mother, and he had to choose between
Oh, I
following
love
his
those
faith or
stories.
following his heart.
Mhm.
And he gave up his robes. He took it to the Vatican, couldn't get permission, so he gave up his robes to marry his this woman,
Buddhist
and
wife.
he Buddhist wife, and the parents were opposed to it at the time. How can she marry a person from a non-Buddhist family, and on top of that, a man of faith in
Right.
cloth? Can't happen.
Very literally,
But
he had cloth, like he had belts that he had to fly back to Italy.
yeah, well, he actually petitioned to get this. But yes, it is true love. I mean, 55, 56 years of marriage, and I've never seen them argue except to annoy each other, but to actually get our attention. Uh, it was amazing, and it was a testament to what love means and what relationships are all about. They taught me that through that through that affair, and then led to the marriage. 56 years to marry. I just lost my mother last year from uh, and not a single day goes by. Still, a year later now, almost, he has a flower every morning by her picture, and he prays for her every single day. There's a picture upstairs and downstairs in the house. He has flowers and lights a candle and prays for her every single day. So that
What
love is
what what I
powerful, right?
what is her name?
Her name is Sarojini.
Well, as your father rests a flower at her altar every single day, let this conversation also be a contribution to her legacy as well. Thank you for sharing that story. It's profound. I don't hear about marriages like that. Really? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a generation gone, or if the bravery or the kind of love that they had was different, but it's an unfamiliar story, but it's one that I daydreamed of when I was a little girl. And when I think of what I want for my children and for everyone who falls in love, the dangers of falling in love, that they have that kind of experience. That's really
And
profound.
it is profound to, and this is when they had to go through a lot of hardships. And the measure of love was because when everyone was against their affair at the time and against their marriage, it actually strengthened their
Wow.
relationship even more. And then the people who were against them were the ones who were advocating for them to get married because they got to know each other.
Right.
So expand this idea. When you don't know someone, you go with what you assume them to be. Oh, this
Right.
person is a man of faith. He's going to force his children to be one religion. He's this and this based on the stereotypes and the myths they have built in their heads,
Yep, of
right?
course.
And the more people fought that, the more the stronger the relationship became because they had to rely on each other. So this idea of the other and othering only helps strengthen the people they're othering, right? We see this in many conflict settings as well. And as you asked that question before about my experiences, one was this profound love affair and this beautiful relationship that taught us about what partnership is, what sacrifice is. My mother said we never sacrifice, even though they sacrificed for many, many years of their life, didn't have money. They lived apart. My father went to Nigeria, then to Oman, just to make a living to help us put food on the table. They
What
lived
did
apart
he
for many years.
I have 2 clarifying questions. How did he find Catholicism? And
Mm.
how did they keep both of the faiths in the home? I also am curious about, like, the how many Catholics there are in Sri Lanka, and then I wanna
Mm.
know what he did in Nigeria and Oman.
Sure. So my father, his dream was to be a Catholic priest. That was his lifeline goal. But he was also an active in sports. So while he was a brother in the faith and in the school, he was also coaching cricket and basketball. He started the first women's basketball team in the country in the
Oh,
in the
I
area
am
that he was.
obsessed with your parents.
But his drive was to be a priest because that was his calling, and he knew that from his in his DNA. So he said that was what I wanted to do. That was my calling, and so he wanted that. But then his life changed when he was a up and coming. I'm not saying this because he's my father. I'm saying this because I've spoken to people outside of my family who said this and corroborated. He was uh, uh, he was handsome, but he was also very popular. And because he was popular and he spoke very well, and I can't do him justice in Malay speak, he was invited to give lectures. And in a training school, a Buddhist school, he was invited to give a lecture at a Buddhist school. And here was this woman in the front row, very dark skinned. My father was light skinned, sitting in front, googly eyes looking at this person. And that was his turning point in his life. So he had to choose basically whether he should be following his religion or not. And he realized religion is something in the heart. It's a way of life, a way of practice. You have rituals, but you have practice you have to live every single day, every single
Right,
moment. So
right.
that's the path he chose after he met her. And then he said to his wife, like, you choose what religion your children want to be, because she was getting pressure from her family that the children should be Buddhist. So he didn't care which religion they were, because ultimately we were exposed to both religions because of that.
So did you this is a very Americanized clarification on the religion. My mother is Christian, my father was
Mhm.
raised Jewish, both ethnically and religiously. And so like we in I regress to my second grade self when I asked this question. So did you have Christmas?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Sri Lanka, we have all religious festivals,
So
right?
but
And
he was go ahead.
no, go ahead, ask the question.
So you had Christmas and he
Uh-huh.
was talking about his relationship to the Christian story, and she was Buddhist and raised you Buddhist. Was that the prerequisite from her family?
Yes, and her desire was to make sure her children were brought up Buddhist. But brought up Buddhist meant at the time was, do we learn Buddhism in school? and go to temple during full moon days. Sri Lanka enjoys every single full moon day, which is once a month. It's a national holiday, a religious holiday. So we have to go to temple on the day and all that in the Buddhist temples. So, but at the same time, we had Christmas, we had Easter. So we always celebrated all these religions at home, these ceremonies at home.
Did he not I struggle with this word so much. Did he not proselytize? He didn't.
No, no, because he was a
Oh,
man of faith.
correct. This is
He
what
was
I'm talking about. Like, I'm so I real issues with religiosity, and as a consequence, the algorithm feeds me a lot of content about it. And I just came across a video of a beautiful man who is of the Christian faith. And he said, he was articulating, he was like, Jesus didn't ask us to worship him. He asked us to follow him. Jesus didn't. And I was like, yes, yes, yes.
and
That
that's
doesn't happen to be the story that I take, that I find peace in. But hearing your dad's story, that strikes me as doing just that, following in the footsteps of somebody like
it's
Jesus.
it's
And
it's not even following in the footstep. It's about following the faith of, like, what did he mean by being kind to each other?
yeah.
Love thy neighbor was, don't, and in Buddhism it's the same thing. Buddhism is not a religion, it's a philosophy, it's a way of life. Buddha also never said to worship him, offer flowers. That's all feeding the ego. That is not what the religion is all about in Buddhist context. It's about practicing faithfully how to be kind to yourself and how to be kind to each other, the others. Even when things are going bad, it's about making sure that you're kind to yourself and to the other. So this idea, it's and he actually, as a Catholic brother, he had to learn Buddhism. He had to learn about Islam and Christianity and Catholicism, Hinduism and Buddhism. He had to learn this, and by learning that those other religions was actually how to actually ground himself in his own faith. So while he was studying Catholicism as a brother, he had to also learn other things too.
Okay.
So there's some interesting chatter happening as well. So preaching, of course.
Well, Go Bird 76. He's from my little teardrop island of Philadelphia. Go Birds.
Mm.
We are very, very proud um, Philadelphia sports fans. And as I was driving today, I was thinking about Philly gets such a bad rap for its sports fans, and recognizing that there was certainly a generation where it was like hooligan style behavior in some of these places. But our current football team that won the Super Bowl last year, if you didn't know, happy to bring
Oh,
that
I
up a
know.
couple of times. But they're actually, I'm a big fan of the family that owns the Eagles. They're the most philanthropic NFL football team. And the owner, Jeffrey, is a huge investor, really a philanthropist into documentary films. And he just produced a film about um, the role of uh, the role that evangelical politicians are playing in Brazil. And this is a man who owns the Eagles.
Mm.
Like it doesn't get more rah, like male domination. And here he is producing documentary films about the role that religion, ironically, is playing in politics around the world. The film just came out on Netflix in July 4th or 14th or something. Um, but there's something so at the core of like loyalty and identity here in Philadelphia. And I think about all the time. Obviously, this was a leading question. Are you seeing any behaviors anywhere in the world? Obviously, very curious here in the United States about the othering. And could Philadelphia as a city, as a brand, its relationship with itself withstand that kind of division? Hearing the relationship between your parents, it's overwhelming to me. I don't I'm asking you, do you think it's uniquely Sri Lankan? It certainly feels like it's uniquely somebody who has a relationship with a religion that I don't know Catholics or Christians. I don't know Jews. I know one Buddhist who is a Buddhist monk who lives in northern India that I would say reflects and represents Buddhism in the way that your parents are describing. But it sounds like the relationship they had with two very different stories in your home helped you hold the contradicting end earlier?
Absolutely. I remember this very purposefully because e- e- even though I was surrounded by a lot of love, I was also surrounded by life lessons every single time. I was the eldest in the family, so and the boy in the family, so all the responsibilities from a very young age were put on me, telling me you had to be an example for everybody else. But what those examples were very profound. It was not about trying to make money. It was about trying to how to be a good human being. Those were the main lessons, and the lessons of being kind to everybody. Don't steal, don't lie, don't do bad things, don't drink. All those were lessons that were taught to me, and they were also taught in Buddhist schools and Christian schools. And when I went to Sunday school, I went for the wrong reasons as a young boy. I went to check out the girls in Sunday school. But when I was there, I was actually listening to the lectures and the discussion. But but there was also, I was confused. What's the difference between Buddhism and Christianity or Catholicism? They're teaching about love in a way that is goes beyond the physical, goes it's deeply metaphysical. And why can't we understand that? But we create these temporary things driven by ego to fight each other. And this fighting comes by othering. This fighting comes by dehumanizing each other. When we are able to see somebody else not as a human being, but like an animal, and it's a small animal, it is easy to kill, it is easy to destroy, it is easy to pull them apart. And that is what I saw growing up in the 83 violence and before. Especially in 83. I also saw the idea of conflict and war is something that happens far away. We were
Mhm.
privileged enough to not smell and taste and feel it. But as I started to see the smoke rising above the tree line and that smoke coming much closer to me, that's when I started to realize, wow, it actually can come to my neighborhood. And I didn't realize the power of it till it actually came to my street, where I got to hear the cries of my friends whose bodies were being burnt alive or bodies being hacked to lives were hacked to death. And at the same time, I got to, so that started by dehumanizing others for several months. So it became very easy for people to kill. The challenge is, can you actually go against those people who are killing when they're also your own tribe or your own ethnicity, your own religion? It feels like you're working against your own beliefs to go against that. They must be right because they are your own people. You trust your own people. But this is where the teachings come back. When it's about, are you killing? Don't kill. That's really stood into me when I had the choice to take revenge or walk away from taking revenge. I chose to walk away, but that was because the decision point to do evil was taking revenge and kill people for the murders they committed, or walking away in shame and embarrassment. I chose to walk away in shame and embarrassment, but that to me was a much more powerful, much more difficult thing to do. It's more heroic to do than actually take revenge. Revenge is easy, killing people is easy. Walking away was much harder. And the reason was because of two things. One, I think the decision points are very small, very close to each other to do evil or good. But how you make the decision is what really matters then. The how at those very more poignant moments is about remembering who we are as core human beings and questioning the urges that come to your mind at those moments. I'm not someone who to tell you, embrace nonviolence. You have to experience it yourself, violence, and then choose nonviolence because you see violence itself. Because you can have an intellectual debate about it, but it's very different when you feel it and have the urge to respond one way or the other. And each person's experience is going to be different. For me, I saw my brother's face in my enemy. That's what I chose to realize me. That was like uh, almost like a vision from somewhere that humanized my enemy, that I forced myself to walk away because of that. So this idea of othering, dehumanizing, making them feel look like animals, talk like animals, look like animals, is very easy then to kill because of that. And we've seen this not just in Sri Lanka. We've seen this in a number of other countries around the world where that happened very rapidly, and mass atrocities were committed because of
Holy shit, I have to put the password back in this computer.
that.
I'll text it to you.
Thank you. Ready? Ready?
Um, uh, thank you for sharing all of that. It sounds like you've shared.
Nice with some spice.
You would. What did you say?
No, nice with some spice is saying something, a nice emoji there. So love to hear what they mean by that.
Oh, it's an emoji. She's laughing at me that I had to interrupt your story about mass atrocity with putting a password into a computer. Um, Saji, admittedly, I'm struggling a little bit on where to go with that. The thing that I'm still confused about, and for
Mhm.
somebody who hasn't experienced mass violence like my lips to all of the God's ears never will, is you said 3 or 4 things that I wanna read books on. They're the following, feel free to pick up whichever one you want. The decision for revenge and to walk away are very close to each other. Why walking away was shame-filled and embarrassment for you. Um, how did you see your brother's face in the other? Did they happen to have the same shape eyes, or you went through an exercise at some point of learning how to humanize somebody whose name and face you've never seen? Um, and then I also from, like, in the most shallow parts of my curiosity, I wanna know what the different sides were. We had one of your colleagues on, Adrian, last week, and we were talking about the Rwandan genocide. And we sort of had this moment, thanks to Jay, who reminded us that folks on some of these platforms might actually not know what happened with the Rwandan genocide and might not know the two sides, Hutu and Tutsi. And she was helpful in giving us a little bit of background. If you're comfortable with it, we can either stay in the esoteric space, which I want to hang out in anyway, but would also love to understand where the division came from and who were the two sides, if it's able to be boiled down to that.
Mhm. So I'll start with that because that's the easier question. The divisions in Sri Lanka. You're talking, Janice, about Sri Lanka, right? The different divisions. So the Sinhala people are the majority people. About 80 plus 90% of the population is Sinhala Buddhist. Follows Sinhala Buddhism, and then there is Christianity, Catholicism, Hinduism, and Islam in kind of that order. So the Tamil minorities, this is confusing by the limits. So people who are Tamil in ethnicity, some of them are Christian, some majority of them are Hindu, and a lot of them come from South India. So the South Indian population is more Hindu, but the others are more who were born and bred in Sri Lanka, follow Christianity also, because we are a legacy of colonialism, the British colony. So we have that influence in our country. We also have the Dutch influence as well. So and then we have the Muslims in the country as well through the Moors and others through migratory patterns. So, but the divisions came by organized. It wasn't by people. It was organized by certain elites on the country who thought that divisions are more profitable and divisions are more appealing to to make their political agency more popular. So therefore, they created these divisions. Sinhala Buddhists are lighter skinned, Tamils are darker skinned. Tamils, because they come from South India, they're a little bit not as equal as us. And that's coming because of colonialism also taught us those things. So the Sinhala majority took this. Sorry, you were saying something?
I was saying apologies. I did notice that when you were describing your mom in the front row when she went to listen to your
Yes,
dad
that's
speak,
why.
that you described her as having a lighter skin tone.
Darker, my mother being darker skinned
Your
and my
mother was
father
dark.
being,
Okay.
yes. even she was Buddhist. But this idea of colorism is that is certain people who are darker skinned are not as attractive, not as strong, not as good, not as qualified. All these things that we can come up with that create these divisions. And because we've also under the colonial rule, the Sinhala majority inherited the colonial legacy, so they were the new colonizers. And they created the further divisions between the Tamil population and this. But what was really interesting, so let me close that loop. In Sri Lanka, it was even though we had Tamils, Muslims, Sinhala, Buddhists, the divisions came not by people who were from these groups. People were coming who wanted to create war. It's very easy to then create war by creating divisions. And those divisions are by creating the myths that people have among themselves. The myth was, and myth and fact together. Myth was Tamil people are not equal to Sinhala people because they are dangerous and bad and they're second class. So that's the starting point. Then you say these people are bad because they're trying to take our homeland, they're trying to create war, and they're trying to create division. And you see the language we've heard even in the US, not far, not too different from this, right? These people are very dangerous to our society. The truth, though, is that the Tamils were living under a racist system inherited by the colonial legacies that Sinhala people adopted. So it created a racist system where there were us and them. We are better than others.
And
So
is it
those,
Saji, is it very easy to tell the difference between a Sinhalese and a Tamil?
yes, by name, sometimes by look, sometimes by dress, you can tell certain differences. Yes. Or the name is the easy one, but then the dress sometimes is also very easy. But the more you talk, you can also understand by the accent, you can somewhat tell the
Like pretty
differences.
quickly.
Yes, like when a friend of mine was shot, they knew that he was Tamil when I was holding his hand, and he was shot and dead right in front of me because he was darker skinned, and they had recognized him as Tamil. And he was asking, pointing the gun at him and saying, "What's your name? What's your name?" And I just tried to diffuse the situation and walk away. He kept pointing the gun and said, "What's your name?" And as soon as he said his name, it was very clear that it was Tamil, and he was shot. So, so it is very easy to do that. So this idea of dehumanizing it might lead to political gains on the short term, but what it leads to is mass killing on the long term. The US has a long history of othering and dehumanizing, and it has led to so much tragedies. And our history in the US is ugly because of that. But it's important to recognize the system that is at play is profiting and benefiting from these otherings also. We can't separate the ethnicity, the differences, and ignore the systems that are playing. A good analogy is in the youth movements. We have this thing. We always ask why are young people joining armed groups? Why are they doing drugs? We always ask these questions. In counterterrorism work, we ask what are the push and pull factors towards violent extremism? Why are young people joining gangs and violent groups? And we said, that's not the right question. We actually wanted to take, so when you're focused on this, you see the image of a young boy or a young girl with a weapon. And that's what we are trying to prevent young people from gangs or young people from taking weapons. But if you zoom out of there and ask, what's the system they are living in? We see that young people are just puppets, and the puppet masters are the systems that are pulling the levers. But we don't focus on the system, we focus on the small problem here and ignore the system. Colonialism is that system, racism is that system. We are not tackling that system. So we continue to perpetuate these problems over and over again, where it becomes becoming a lot more easier to create divisions. Divisions is profitable. Divisions is better because it leads to people's status being maintained, their comfort zone. Sorry, this is an ugly truth, but this is what I have seen throughout different places in the world, and I've lived through that in myself.
Saji, The gentleman, the person who killed your friend, what is your friend's name?
Naren.
The person who killed Naren, he could tell that you weren't Tamil just because of your skin tone, or he knew you previously?
he he had known about me because my mother was very popular in the city. She was a teacher. She was feared by everyone because she was a strict teacher, but also admired. So everyone knew her. So she said, I at this point he was saying, no, that's Mrs. Prelis's son, because the people who came from outside. The wild people who were the violent perpetrators were coming organized by the government. They came from other places to kill. Uh, but he didn't know me, but somebody luckily enough said this is so and so, and my singular was strong enough that he would know that I am still singular. My friend wouldn't, so that's why.
Was that, I it sounds like there must have been a number of different catalyzing moments for you. Was that one of them? You described having bore witness to the departure, the murder, the slaughter of many people whose names you knew. How did you what did you do? How did you wake up the next day?
Well, let me first talk about how I woke up from being unconscious, falling down, thinking I was also shot next to him because I had blood on my friend's blood on me. I thought I was shot. And when I realized that I was not shot, the hardest wake up was to actually walk away and leave my friend's body there because everything was burning around me. So that was one wake up. The second wake up was the days following. I was filled with rage. I was filled with fear. I was filled with guilt. And I was filled with anger. All of these emotions were going through my mind at the same time, racing through my mind. At the same time, I was also being confused with additional messages about what I was learning when I was growing up. All these things I can say at the time, it was like crap, like don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't kill. All these things were countering what I was feeling at the time. And it was really annoying. Uh, so, but because it was war, we had to get up the next day and go back to our lives and do our things. Uh, our family was hiding people in our house, so-called enemy. We were hiding them, we were clothing them. We were not alone. We had lots of people we saw knew who did the same thing, because why not, right? We saw when throughout history we've seen this happen, where people risk their life to save and protect and safeguard their enemies. Why? Because they're humans. They know them. They can't do these things. So there's something in our DNA that forces us to not do things, even though it goes against our emotions. But at the same time, more people are more prone to doing violent things because it's so easy to do. When you get people angry enough, it is not hard to get people to do bad things. We've seen that throughout history, how easy it is to do. And the easiness comes because you otherize and demonize and dehumanize people. Then it's easy to justify. In my head, I could have killed him because of all these reasons, and I can get up the next day and say, I did the right thing because I protected my people. I was doing it in the name of my people, my tribe, my group, and go about my life without any guilt. Because life also then happens. You get busy with everything else and you move on. But I know at, when I was leading up to taking revenge, I realized I cannot do this and carry this burden on with me for the rest of my life that I took somebody else's life.
Did you want to?
That, oh, hell yeah, I wanted to. Absolutely. With every single fiber in my body, I wanted to. This is why I think, said the decision points to do good and evil are always in us. And the distance between the two decision points are not oceans apart. It actually is very close. This is why I said that. Put yourself in this situation. I don't mean to say this in a negative way. It's coming from a place of love. Imagine what you would do if someone took all your children away in front of you and did bad things to them. We will do everything in our power to avenge that, right? And protect our children. That's human nature. And that's what I was seeing right in front of me. My friends I was going to school with, the people I cared for, were being killed. What do you do? And if you actually kill, then you're a hero because you're protecting your people, you're protecting your tribe, you're protecting your ethnicity, you're protecting your value system because they were the enemy. So that's why I'm saying this is a not easy task to do. But if you go through this, then you know the decisions are not far apart. The things you do to make that decision is not doesn't come magically at that moment. It's years in the making. And here's how I'll describe this. An earthquake doesn't just happen suddenly. The trigger is the earthquake, but the triggers for that earthquake happen over many years. Same thing with volcanoes. Conflict is the exact same thing. These are examples that are in the universe. Conflicts are brewing underneath, and then what we hear and talk about is the explosion of violence,
Mhm, mhm.
right? But we neglected all the reasons why it built up, and we ignore the building up at all completely. And the building up is what I focus a lot on, because that's where we can settle the grievances, settle these things before it even becomes, right? So for me, those issues were the values that I was put in my mind, and the causes of that as a young person. And I work a lot. I had the huge privilege of working with young people around the world, and I have these discussions with them. Even last week in Helsinki, I was talking with a group of people from about 12 countries coming together, and we were discussing this issue, how young people feel excluded and invisible, and how frustrated they are to inherit a broken system and inherit future debt for today's war machine. So these are questions that young people are already unpacking, and I was unpacking as a young person. So the decision to good and evil, the things that came up. So the other question was, did I see my brother's image? It was, I think, a vision for me. It wasn't him, but what I saw was something that resembled him. I saw the enemy. He was afraid, but I saw my brother's face in him, meaning I saw his fear. That was what triggered me to say, wait a second. It kind of caught me off guard, and wait a second, why? What am I doing? Then I was really angry and frustrated with myself and embarrassed, so I had to walk away.
Sorry,
But
your brother was
no, he
actually
wasn't there.
he wasn't there. Okay, okay.
It was just a vision of something resembling my brother that I saw in him. I think it was like a divine vision, that some sort of a thing that I saw. But I also saw the person. I saw, obviously I was seeing the person who murdered the murderer, and I saw in his face anger and fear at the same time. And as soon as I saw that, that's when I saw my brother's face resemble him, even though they don't look alike at all. So to me, that was part of the upbringing. And then the murderer's face was also part of the upbringing. So those two are juxtaposed that may help me make a decision. Now, at the time, I didn't know this. It was later on that I started to think and analyze these things and study war and conflict and hatred to understand what these are. To me, those were the things that I can say here in a very simple way for this to make sense. I hope that
Oh,
is
no,
clear.
of course it does. No, it does. Thank you, Saji. You're very patient in my line of questioning. I appreciate it. I think I'm also desperate because you say that they're good and evil are right next to each other. And I often think of the phrase, the line between love and hate are also, it's super,
Oh,
super thin. And
exactly.
I've been in relationships where I was totally in love with someone and then something happened and my vengeance and hate toward them was pretty extreme. Um, but it does feel like that is our collective exercise and like almost where to reference to be religious for a moment, like this is where we are our brother's keeper is that there aren't necessarily moments throughout life where we are confronted with the same options that you were, and we rely on each other to keep our everyone at least enough on the good side to not continue to perpetuate the thing. Um, but I guess my follow-up question to that is, and I do want to lean into this the capacity for youth. And my hypothesis is that young people are closer to good because they just haven't been as jaded over the generations. And I'm wondering if that's accurate. But I want to know if, like, if we were to measure how, like, the state of humanity, how many people are, like, gonna end up on the good side versus how many people would end up on the evil side with confronted with the same thing that you were confronted with on that street. Has history suggested that, like, at any minute, like, you actually just don't know if Jenna would end up on good and evil? Like, you just wouldn't, because it's so contextual. If it has to do with a person she didn't know down the street versus if it happened to do with her 7-year-old son, like, it's so subjective. But, like, where do you think humanity is headed? And why do you think youth are a linchpin in that?
Wow, that's a $1 million question actually. The reason I say that is because there's a group of people who say that we are abdicating our responsibility and kicking the can down the road so our young people can solve the problems that we have created. That is highly responsible of us as adults, right? But we have that statement itself also means that we are hoping that young people will solve our problems that we couldn't solve. That is not a good enough way to abdicate our responsibilities. But to get to the heart of this question, when you look at the youth movement around the world, across you're looking at children, adolescents, early youth, middle youth age groups, so 15 through 25-year-olds, for example, right? You're looking at them who actually have uh, there's a message for me that says reload. Am I?
No, you're good.
No, I'm
Keep
good.
going.
I'm good.
It's
uh,
fine. There was a bot that showed up and Jay was solving it. It's okay.
okay, good. So there's this idea with young people. By the way, there is about over 3 billion people below the age of 30 out of 8 billion people, right? And for example, in the continent of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, the median age in the continent is 19. Some of the countries with the youngest population is in Niger, in the Sahel region. Median age, 14 and a half. Cross over to the eastern side, DRC, median age, 15 almost. So you're looking at large youth populations. One is demographic reality, right? The second is who are those people leading these countries? The About 2.8% of members of parliament are below the age of 30. That means a vast majority of members in decision making are older. Presidents and prime ministers, median age is 65 to 75.
Is that
Oldest is
true?
92
Wait,
around the
sorry.
world.
This is on the continent of Africa or worldwide?
Worldwide, 2.8. So globally, the median
Yeah.
age of a sitting president, prime minister, generally, or head of state or head of government is anywhere between 65 to 75.
What do you
But
think? Go
but the
ahead.
oldest is 92
Who is that?
in Cameroon. Uh, so Paul
Is,
Biya.
did my eye roll was my eye roll clear?
Very clear. Uh, but,
Wait,
but
but before we move on from that,
yeah.
a quick story. I'm very, very good friends with the PM of Albania, and
Mhm.
when I've spent time with him in country, I've spent a lot of time with his secretaries across all the different cabinets. And they're like between 30 and 40. And they kept saying, they're like, Jenna, would you ever run for president? This was, I think, during Trump's first term. Because again, we're all just like grabbing straws everywhere in the world. Everyone's like, who wants in? And I was like, oh, I'm not old enough. And they are like, I don't why do you have to wait so long? Why do you have to wait so long? And I'm like, I don't know. You got to pay your dues. And I have it. Those questions have haunted me. Like, what? Why? And every time I've tried to do something in this country from a policy perspective or a movement, I mean, people are really like, you have to pay your dues. So what do you think
But
about? But there is such
what,
wisdom in those
what's the use you're
generations.
talking? But what use are you talking about? Is it
It's it's the political
is
stuff.
it experience? Let me break this
Yeah.
experience down. The longer you are in office, you kind of hint at this. The older you get, the more cynical you are. But the older you get, they have left this world in a really shitty place right now.
Okay, so this is what Saji. I was just on
What does
MSNBC
it
on.
mean by wisdom of older people?
So I spending being a left-leaning voice that goes on a lot of right outlets. The question I get, they'll be like, "We're going to talk about tariffs. We're going to talk about whatever, any other subject." And what do we always end up talking about is, what are you going to do about that Democratic Party of yours? Are you so disappointed? I mean, they're in shambles. Everyone says they're in shambles. The polls, the polls, the polls, and I mean this when I say, and I will die on the mountain for the left, the progressive. Like, I don't know what's going to happen either. But anything that we have done before cannot be done again because it's gotten us to where we are. And I do
100%.
feel like there is a generation on the Democratic left that like still feels like they should be carrying the torch and holding the torch. I think as a society, I think it's very European, I think it's very white, I think it's very privileged that like we don't do a good job of helping men in power get off the highway. We don't. How do we off ramp them with
Mhm,
grace and humility and self worth and enoughness that they don't drive companies, fucking countries into the ground? But like it is a very Western concept that like they know better. It's the same myth of the role that the white jacket plays in
mhm,
medical rooms. If you can sit there and if you're receiving some of the worst news of your life and someone's on the other side of the desk wearing the white medical coat, you're
mhm.
you defer to that power.
Yeah, 100%. But the truth is, there is wisdom in every generation, across generations, right? There is wisdom that is critical. I remember recently there was a Senate or House hearing on Sudan, and there were people who were brought to talk about Sudan's conflict. And the experts they brought, mostly older, their answers were based on 20, 50, 100-year old histories. You say, to address this conflict, we had to go back in time. Then there was a lonely single voice of a young woman in that audience who was testifying also. We purposely bring young people into this room. And they were saying, you can argue about the 100 years of our history and how our root causes, but in few years, none of us will might be alive to reap the benefits of tomorrow if we continue to focus on the past. So this idea of the wisdom that young people bring is cut through the bullshit, cut through the crap, and say, here's what we need to focus on. Because they see, because the minds of young people is so elastic. They don't create vertical governance models, vertical titles, structures. They don't like that structure at all.
Hmm.
Their leadership model is horizontal, right? When you talk to a youth movement leader,
Sorry,
say
did
this
you
is.
feel like I apologize for interrupting, but do you feel like that's a universal.
Yeah, I've seen this in a number of youth movements around the world, where, well, all the generations like titles. Older people are part of organizations that are title-based structures, bureaucracies. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You need
Yeah,
structure,
I get it. But
right?
there's
But
like an intuitive horizontal decentralization that happens with youth
100%,
movements.
100%. And the beauty of it is, you'd say it's from the outside, it looks like it's a leaderless movement.
Hmm.
But when you actually understand the language and you understand nuances and are able to navigate these movements, then you understand it's actually a leaderful movement. Everyone is playing their role. But when the outside it's just leader, who do I need to talk to? That's a very typical answer to question because we don't know how to engage. But when you do know how to, then it sees it's a leaderful movement. The beauty though is that we need both. If we are really trying to fix our broken systems, we need to bring the horizontal and the vertical together so we can collectively tackle those common problems. So we both feel like we have impact on it. We both have a stake in it, and we both can feel that we are part of that solution and the impact we want to have. So this idea of collective impact is important. And there's a kind of model that we've learned from around the world that we've tested out. And this idea is, so it's about power. So you're bringing vertical and horizontal power to collaborate despite the difficulties, despite the broken system, despite the distrust. But the three areas, there was a book that was written about this as well. You want to think like a system. The problems are multiple. You think like a system. Then you lead like a movement, right? You have that movement mindset coming in. So sorry, I think like a system, act like a network. So think like a system, horizontal, act like a network, but lead like a movement. And the lead like a movement is about bringing the movement mindset in so people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. A lot of us make this about projects, funded projects, few years and all that. And it rips the concept of movement from it. This idea of this movement is so critical because that's when people feel like they're belonging to something greater than themselves. That's what makes them sacrifice a lot to do this. We don't have to go far. Look at some of the violent groups. They make people believe, for bad reasons too, but there's something about they make people believe that they can fight for something, even though we may not achieve it. They want to
Mhm.
do something because they're so tired of being left away, left out, right? And we don't do that well in social science, social movements, like with governments. So this idea of making people feel like they're part of something bigger, we see in the right wing movements also sometimes, but not in the progressive movements because we structure it very differently. But this is so fundamentally important.
Sorry, tell us, how are we structuring it in the progressive movements that are
Even the
shooting ourselves in the foot?
progressive movements are ageist. We are too old and too broken and not getting the young people to be part of these movements together. And that's the fundamental key here.
Sorry, but don't you think that the conservative movements are too? I mean, Trump's 82 or something.
Conservative, yes, but look who they are engaging. They are actually engaging young population, young men specifically, but they're engaging them directly and giving them spaces to in power. They are not
Okay, hold
disconnecting
on.
someone.
Back up. The progressive movement is ageist.
I
To
would say that the progressive movement has some blockages, right? One of those blockages is not creating enough space with power for young people to own those spaces. We
Why
have
don't you think
progressive,
they do that?
well, because we have these ageist beliefs that I have expertise, I have experience, I know how to do these things. And that might be true to some degree. But what have we got to lose by expanding the pie? If progressive means expanding the tent is not about just wanting to be part of it. They want to have leadership positions also. Otherwise, they're just trickle down. They don't get much benefits from. So there is a need to have leadership roles, political roles, because it's a political agency that gets raised from young people, right? This is why young people are wanting to play roles in local elections, wanting to play roles in school boards and others, is because they want to be part of the decision making. They don't want to be in the sidelines for crumbs. They want to be part of this because they're the ones seeing the impact of it the most.
Okay. Do you mind if I keep pushing a bit?
Yeah, yeah, please, please. I'd love to have this. Please push me.
Okay. So, but here's my question, and this was a conversation that I had this morning. So, there's Bucks County, which is where I live. Bucks County, Pennsylvania has it's a very important county in the state, a bit of a canary in the coal mines of a county. It's where a lot of the books were stripped from public schools, rainbows were taken off of kindergarten classroom walls. And there is a congressman there who is Republican. He is anti-choice, which for me, like, it's a very black and white line. If you're anti-choice, then you're anti woman's autonomy over her own body. Um, but then he just voted against the big beautiful bill, and it is unlikely that Trump is going to go after him because Trump has just like sort of bigger fish to make a big deal about, like the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics who just reported the jobs data. Like, it just hasn't trickled down to this guy Fitzpatrick. And I organize in Bucks County with a lot of progressive left folks who have said, just leave Fitzpatrick, just leave him be, just let him be. He's like locked and loaded. He's going to continue to win. He doesn't need to be challenged, whatever it might be. And it's just like, well, how many years do we just let him continue to stay in office? And the theory is that one, and I was asked this on air the other night,
Mhm.
specifically when it came to, we were supposed to be talking about Epstein. And of course, we just talked about the Democratic Party, which was, well, don't you need a older white male to go after Trump? Like, we've had two of the most qualified female candidates, the most qualified candidates we'll
Yeah.
ever see, who happen to be female, who have not been able to win the popular vote. Shouldn't we just put another white man on the ticket? And I'm really torn, Saji, because I'm like, fuck that. Like, we're going to continue to
Yeah.
try because that's the country and the world that we want and that we need. And at some point, they'll cave. Yet, the voters in Bucks County, even if they're left and consider themselves progressive, are mostly like folks who feel like someone who's paid their dues, who's been there, who's walked a sort of like bipartisan line, that it does feel like the voters want that. There's only appetite for so many AOCs in so many districts around the country, even though we're seeing it. I don't know. Mamdani is like giving me tremendous hope. I'm a big fan of AOC in general.
Mhm.
I was a huge fan of Cori Bush because she was a single mom and a nurse. Like, there's no more
Mhm.
qualified person to make decisions on our behalf than that person. But then she just got replaced with a more centrist Democratic candidate.
Mhm.
So I hear you. I agree with you. And I don't know if that's what the voters want.
Which voters are we talking about?
American.
I know, but what age groups of
White,
voters? Because
white,
there's a
white.
comment here itself about the youth movement is progressive, the liberal core of Democratic Party are blocking progressivism. And I think this idea of that's why I'm asking, because there's more and more people now coming into becoming voting age, right? And so there is a group of people who will tend to older who sometimes want to be a little bit on the middle, and the others want to take a risk. And we saw that risk playing a role in the electoral elections recently, also last year. So this idea that there's a couple of thoughts. One, I think, is voting is important, but it is also rigged in a way. We saw what's happening in Texas with the gerrymandering stick, right? So this is becoming more and more the case. So can progressives win in a broken electoral system is a bigger question that I'm first
I
proposing,
think that's a good
right?
one.
Right?
I'm going to write that
Because
down. Keep going.
because because that's an important question, because otherwise you're asking about who can win elections within a broken system. This is the fundamental question young people are asking. Why do I have to participate in a broken system where we need to fix the system itself? The system is broken, right? So this is one issue. The second issue is, do we need to make sure we are expanding the electorate and the voting base, but creating the right messages? So you see an evolution of Casio AOC in her messaging because she's trying to reach broader audiences. And that's because she's able to touch the hearts of different age groups. She was first started by reaching only to her voting bloc who was young and Hispanic and a group of other progressives. But the more she wants to become a popular vote, she has to engage others. So you have to do that, but without sacrificing your values of what you actually want to stand for. But the third is that money in politics and elections is so ugly that it is, you can't win without getting sponsors and rich donors to support you. So it becomes the barrier of entry for people is so high that if you don't have the money, you can't actually compete. That system is rotten because it doesn't lead to people actually benefiting from it. And people like Trump are taking advantage of that. It's to his own advantage, right? But it doesn't lead to people benefiting from it. And I think if we don't tackle those, we are in a dangerous situation in the coming years.
Okay, so just assuming you have the solution.
No, we have to. I think the solutions are in the many people actually. Uh, I mean, this is not easy to do, but what happened to the electoral college when we were saying that we need to get rid of it? Address that. What happened to taking money out of politics? It didn't happen because the Supreme Court has supported it. But this is what I'm talking about, the system that is really corrupt at its core. How do we change that? Well, Trump is writing the book on this right now. Are Democrats willing to go the mile, extra mile, like Trump is doing? Or are they going to be too nice? I think this is an important question for the Democratic Party and the progressives to actually ask. Are we actually doing the same things that Trump is willing to do to benefit him versus society? And this is an important question. Trump is Trump is actually doing some amazing things to change, create new systems and change the system. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. He's actually writing the book for what the Democrats and the progressives should be doing in the future. That type of thing hasn't come across. We haven't seen that type of rhetoric at all in the Democratic side, except a few conversations. We need that. We need that. That's what will get the voting base to increase for younger people to feel like they have hope in somebody. And the
And do
pack the
you
poll is one other thing.
but so and it do you believe that it's younger voices that have the courage to do that?
I mean, over and over again, young people have shown that they generally stand on the right side of history. They have continuously shown from the civil rights movement onwards. Civil rights movement was started by a youth. It was a youth movement, right? Martin Luther King was a young person at the time. Gandhi was a young person at the time. But we remember them as older, but they were actually youth when they started them. And it is that movement that needs a little more oxygen because the wisdom that exists in the youth movements often gets neglected because of these ageism ideas that we know better than young people. And the level of collaboration that is necessary across these generations is absolutely needed if we are trying to actually tackle the biggest problems we are going to be facing in the coming years. Is as a country in the US and as the world, we need these generations to collaborate even more and create space with power and the resources to actually make decisions together. Not decisions by older to younger, but really make decisions and have young people sitting in the same level of power and influence to do this properly. Otherwise, we are going, we are just talking around, we are tinkering around the edges. We are only
Wow,
tinkering.
Jay, I forgot that he was that young. MLK was only
Yeah,
39 when he died. I forgot about that.
yeah.
That's
My,
crazy.
all of Jesus was a youth when he started this work, right? Martin Luther King was a youth. Gandhi was a youth. All these people were young, but we forget that.
Yeah, it's true. We really do. So, um, so the ageism is actually it's from the older generations that really have put up some of those boundaries. And it
Hmm?
seems like, for generations, people have always felt like young folks were the people to be managed. Saji, can you tell me a bit about the role that young people played in ending Sri Lanka's mass violence?
I can give you two quick examples about how Sri Lanka young people play. So I was saying earlier that there was electricity cuts lasting 10, 15, 20 hours. No fuel in the country. People were in line for 10, 15 hours just to get fuel to put for generators or home medical equipment and a whole bunch of other things just to keep things going. And people were getting tired of the politicians, the ruling class, just profiting, ab- abstract profit, profiting from all these mega deals. and people were starving, couldn't make ends meet. The dollar was crashing. So they realized this is not right. And what happened was they started to get onto the streets and protest. But it wasn't just a protest, but it was actually a call to action for young people to come and learn about their history, learn about organizing, learn how to be collective in nature. And it became an environment movement, a social conscious awakening movement, moral rearmament movement, and and a movement to actually say we want to retake our country back in a way that actually aligns with our values of a nation that is diverse. So we had people who were young from different religious groups, ethnic groups, socioeconomic classes coming together in the city in Colombo, in Golf Face Green, this big park in front of this colonial hotel. People were gathered and they were organizing, they were talking to each other, telling stories about what social movements are all about and engaging people's, not only their minds, but their hearts. They were able to sacrifice a lot and continue to come. And against the government crackdowns, they continue to protest. But the reason they succeeded is not because of their tireless efforts. And here's where the magic happens. It also was supported by the law association, the teachers association, the trade unionists, and the adults. When they came to the streets, they said the older people saw that young people are risking and sacrificing a lot to take it to the streets. And the older generation grew up, my generation and older grew up in a culture of suppression. We couldn't speak out against the government because there were people listening, and our bodies could have watched our show tortured because we were conspiring against the government. So that generation was very afraid to speak. Younger generations growing up in a freer society didn't have that history and baggage, so they were taking those risks to do it. It was that was the wake up call for the older generation. Say, if they're sacrificing for our country, why am I sitting at home? Why am I just working? Maybe I need to go. So that tipping point was when the unions, trade unions, the lawyers association came to the streets to support. Then it became a real people's movement. That was a tipping point. Then it became much bigger and it
You-
spread across the country. And I'm
uh,
saying this very purposefully to actually show what it actually takes to go from a youth movement to creating political agency for the adults to actually support that youth movement without hijacking it. There were hijackings happening, but this is an important marker in any social movements also. It's like this other categories of people coming and supporting this movement is so critical to give it more political agency and power and legitimacy.
Saji, I'm going to ask us to tread into some dangerous territory on this. It strikes me that heading into before October 7th, 2023, there was a lot of protesting in Israel I forget if it was Friday night or Thursday night. I know it had something. I know there was like a
Mhm.
routine in the same way that Greta Thunberg had always done the sit out of schools
Right
on
as well.
Thursday. Um, but there was a lot of protesting, and people were taking to the streets against Bibi and what he was doing to stacking the courts. To Jay's point about stacking the courts to protect himself, and this was again before October 7th, which just feels like it's ancient history at this point. But is that a good example? Can you offer some additional examples where that is happening, was happening in our recent history to point to
Mhm.
outside of those examples?
So those are great examples of students risking their lives, going out there saying, "We want something different. We don't want our name, our country, our future being used this way." Bangladesh is another country that this happened in, right? And you saw what it led to. Bangladesh was a youth movement, also primarily student movement, but they were learning from the Sri Lankan youth. I
Right.
was in several conversations where the youth movement in Sri Lanka, the leaders called the Aragale, were talking with the Bangladesh youth leaders to talk about lessons learned, how to, from tear gas management to political tactics to strategize, and how to get tipping points in the society to get them engaged outside of Dhaka. So these were all conversations were happening, and it led to something. Now, other places around the world, this is similar things have happened. Some of them have not gone well. Some of them have gone okay. Like, for example, in Nigeria, the SARS movement was a great example of talking about police brutality and police violence. It was in Nigeria. Um, but there's a movement in Burundi that was all started by young people. Kenya, just last year and this year,
Mhm.
the student movement, the youth movement that brought it to life that the finance bill in Kenya is dangerous for young people. That the burden of economic burden that is put on young people cannot be. What it led to was a check in government's power to say, no, you cannot just do this and profit from these things. And you need to start thinking about the generation to come. What's interesting is the Kenya protest movement was leading to about, if I'm not mistaken, $20 million a day of profit losses for the private sector. And what we were able to do from our research, we found that investing in youth peace building, every dollar has a $5 to $10 return on this investment. So let me say this again. Every dollar invested in youth peace building in Kenya has a $5 to $10 return on that investment. And
Meaning
that
like a
return,
$5 to $10 return on stability or
return on
impact.
investment, return on investment to the youth, but more importantly, return on investment to the private sector, to return on investment to local authorities, because they didn't have, all of these sectors were benefited from youth peace building, which meant less violence, less disruptions on the streets. The private sector losing $20 million a day because of the youth protests meant that having solutions for young people means better business outcomes and bottom line profits for companies, right? And also protest means there's disruptions for the value chains, so this was affecting them. Women's organizations benefited from young people's work. So what it did was it actually made young people feel seen, more heard, and valued because their work was seen in a different light. Their work goes from doing youth work to seeing them as contributing to other stakeholders like the private sector in our country. So you elevate the voice of young people even more and show them the power that they have. And this is what led to, in Kenya, over 240 different youth organizations have come together despite the protest and are working with 14 different government ministries to develop a plan, a national strategy that sees young people as a partners in a peace process in Kenya, that sees them in, even though there is no trust, they're trying to build trust over the next 3 to 5 years to improve young people's sense of agency, improve your institutions' way of understanding and responding to young people's needs better, uh, issues of trust intergenerationally, addressing violence against young people and sense of safety for young people, and helping to improve resources for young people to actually continue to improve their return on investment itself. So those are things that they are designing over the next 3 to 5 years, using the protest as a way to change the narrative. Yeah.
Do
So
you
that's just
think
an example of the positives of this.
Okay, I have two questions, and Saji, I want to be sensitive of your time because we're almost
This is
coming up
okay.
on to 2
I'm
hours. We're
enjoying these
coming up to 2 hours. Okay,
conversations.
good. Good. I'm glad I'm not boring you to tears.
No, not at
So
all. Oh my
so
God, Jenna. Yes, you are. No, I'm just joking.
you're like, can I please leave now? Who cares about all
Can I
this?
leave now?
Yeah. Um, Here are two questions. One, do you think American youth 15 to 25, let's just put me in the category, even though I'm not technically in 15 to 25, but like, do you think we are selfless enough to sustain that? What role do you think race would potentially play in a youth-led movement here in the States? What do you think would be the primary, like, what do you think would be the things that could potentially catalyze a youth movement? Having been one of the organizers of the Women's March, it was,
Mhm.
I mean, the saying, Margaret Mead's saying, it only takes a couple of people to change the world. Like, it was only 12 of us and like a couple of Google
Yeah.
Excel spreadsheets and a Facebook invitation to launch the Women's March. Like, it really was that simple. Um,
Mhm.
but like, what would young people in the US do here that, like, do you see any low-hanging fruit? Do you think we have the stamina? Do you think we're too entitled for something like that?
But you see this, Jenna, if you go back and ask what were the key
Jenna, you're
ingredients
the
for your success?
problem. Your assumptions are the problem.
I wouldn't say that. What I'm saying is, what were the key ingredients for you to succeed beyond this, an Excel sheet and Facebook group, right? You wanted to make people come together around a common issue, make them feel important, right? Their voice mattered, and that they have a role to play in changing doing something good. At a time when things were not going well for a lot of, there was a lot of fear and
Yeah, but
anxiety
it's
and all that.
worse. It's
You,
worse than it
it
was. It's
was,
worse
it
today than
is.
it was on January 21st, 2017.
100%. But what you had was the opportunity because it was a pain point that people were feeling. Women were feeling this. So it was a great time to organize around that. Fast forward to now. There are lots of youth groups and movements around the country that are already organizing. There are a lot of groups that are already doing it. So, but they're not, some of them are actually organizing across, some are in their own communities organizing uh, around race relations, across race relations. They're organizing these things. So the question is, how do you bring some of them together and tap into those? Because there are common challenges. What's the common problem they're all facing that they can all tackle together? And that's the question that we can ask people in these movements to come to say, what do we come together to do together? Your pain points are unique. So some are working on immigrant rights, some are working on farmers' rights, some are working on higher education issues, some are working on prison reform, police reform, social security. A lot of people are working on these things, but what do you have in common? And what can we tackle together that is common that actually goes beyond us as individual groups? And if that is there, I'm not talking about a political party because as soon as you talk about a political party, it becomes something corrupt. And to keep it below that and see how to get at the social, I think the ingredients are already there for it. It's the question is,
Well,
do
what
you have?
is well then since we're hypothesizing here, what is the thing that they all have that they could all agree on, that they could all join forces? If one of them is trying to get money out of politics, if one of them is working on the border, if one of them is working on social security,
Mhm,
one of the things that I'm still haunted by it, not haunted because I've both been this person and am particularly cognizant of people who embody some of these characteristics, is when I was at the United Nations, we had an acronym known as MONGO. Do you know what a MONGO is?
mhm. I've heard
My,
this term before.
my own
But,
NGO.
yes.
My own NGO, which is like someone who is well intended, who might be doing some really great work, measurable or not, it doesn't matter. There's no succession plan. It's not part of a larger whole. It's someone who is just getting 5 girls or 50 girls into school in rural Kenya. Great, thank
Mhm,
you. And it's a temporary band aid for a crisis.
mhm,
It seems like at least in the first Trump term, there was a lot of them. I mean, one of the things that really imploded with the Women's March, and it's almost a little bit still too soon for me to talk about because it's not entirely just my story. I had my very unique
mhm,
experience for why the Women's March didn't sustain itself. But the reason why I believe it didn't is because the focus in planning was just 9 a.m. on January 21st, 2017. And then by 9 p.m. that evening, and everyone's staring at a grid of marches around the world, 624 of them. And then the requests that came in, like ego really got in the way for the whole
mhm,
team. And the musculature and the humility, the wounds, all of those things were just there to make it problematic and unsustainable. And I'm of two minds. Both, one, the Women's
mhm.
March was never meant to be anything more than that day. It catalyzed a bunch of movements worldwide. Certainly here in the
That's
US, a
important.
week later, there was the Muslim ban for preventing Muslims from coming into the United States, and people fled to airports largely because they felt like they could draft off of what happened the Saturday before.
Mhm,
But so then there was a lot of just like Mongo, my progressive issue politics. The other great example is families belong together. When Trump started to separate um, caretakers and children at the border, all of the immigration oriented organizations came together under a single banner, families belong
mhm,
together, and it became a coalition. And I think coalition work really, really works well. there haven't been a ton of other examples where nonprofits who are fighting for the same dollar, fighting for the same cause, have different schools of thought of how change can happen or the kind of change
Mhm.
that should happen. Like, what would be the thing now if you were to bullhorn to young people in the United States and we're like, guys, get on the same page about blank and go do blank? What would it be?
Well, fine. First of all, I'm not in that age group that I have the credibility to speak to young people and them to listen. But the second, I think, is it needs to be a little bit more humility of us to listen a little bit more to what they want, that they think is the most necessary, and then coming up with strategies and tactics to help them succeed based on our collective experience of success and failure we have had. So there's two levels of it. One is organizing, they know how to do that. But what we struggle with is how do you change the political system from that organizing? That's where we fall short. A lot of young youth movements fall short. This is where we need to pay attention to how to do that and enable them to position themselves to succeed in that. Right? And I think that's where we can, people like us who have had some of these experiences can actually play an important role in. But it requires us to take our hats off, take our biases off, and first spend some time listening to some of the grievances they have before they talk about solutions. This takes time, but this is again goes back to an earlier comment we talked about. Your movement led to so many other movements. Your movement wouldn't have succeeded without other movements coming before you, right? So we shouldn't look at this as we're going to change this by the next election cycle.
Oh
We should
shit.
look at this.
Okay.
sorry, sorry, sorry to burst your bubble, but you're not going to do that. But unless you have lots of money and lots of people behind you. But short of that, here's another way of thinking about this over the next 10, 15 years. How do we create something that is really shaping something different? Because what's going to happen today will die. Everything throughout history has a rise and fall. Just like our breaths have rise and falls, just like civilizations have rise and falls, this is also going to have a rise, and there's a rise and a fall in everything in our lives. So let's not get caught up in the moment of today. It's ugly, it's difficult, dangerous for many, but if we take the longer path, not long like 100 years, then I think we might be able to create an architecture for the systems to change better. The problem is we take the short term, we are trying to change the system today for today. And that's where we fall short. I think we need that requires a bit different ego management too, right? Because Mongo is one part of it, but people don't have the patience to think long term.
Right.
But real system change takes time. It takes a longer time to create system, but those are the ones that will actually endure, not the short ones. It takes time to mature, and then you need to have the stamina to do that. That's what will actually do this. Sorry to have no quite good answer with a nice treatable thing or whatever exable thing, but it is what actually changes systems to the better. It needs careful patience to do this well. There's a couple of key messages here, principles. One is this movement mindset thing. Second is identifying key people who influence more people to bring them onto a common
Right.
understanding. Embracing a 3-degree shift approach in that process.
What's
Thinking
a
of
what's that? Yeah, what's that?
so, like a 3-degree shift is like, let's take a farming, right? You don't flood the field to irrigate your farm and grow your crops. You do, little by little, you water the field, and over time, the crops grow better. Same thing with people movements. Also, you over time, 3-degree
Mhm.
shifts over time add up to something more. But at each 3 degrees, you create milestones and successes and celebrate those successes so people feel like you're making progress and it's not a dead end work that you're trying to do. And here is that movement mindset. People feel like I'm part of something much bigger. I'm willing to sacrifice because I see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I
Right?
have to say, I do feel like the 3 degree, and I'm not entirely sure on how you picked 3 versus 6 degrees.
I don't know. Just,
Okay, but I love the example of well, you can see I'm doodling and I'm taking notes,
Mhm.
but when but it's like I was like, it was like a dove right? I mean, this is it's a dove. It's part of it's on brand.
Mhm.
But when we talk about politics, and particularly in the swing county of Bucks County, when we're door knocking, we don't try to get somebody to move from not liking your candidate to then definitively voting for them. We're
No,
just trying to
it's
get them to step two, which is like just posing the question is, are they sure their candidate's right? And then
mhm.
once they're here, maybe they're open to hearing how this candidate might have an interesting idea for them. And then once, I always say, like, don't spend any time on the fours, fives, because we know where they're like, I think twos, threes are actually the right
Yeah,
place for us to spend our very limited resources. Because if
yeah.
we can move them one, the ones are too far gone. That's a terrible thing to say. The ones are probably, they might not be interested in spending any time in the two space.
Not today, but maybe day after tomorrow they might, right?
Right.
We're seeing already. Look at how afraid and worried some people are in the regime of today who is in power. People are worried about what they signed up for. So what they people might believe today might not be the same tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's
No,
where
I
trust
agree with you.
comes
I
in.
agree with
This
you.
is where trust comes in, knowing people really matter. So then you can go back to these people. The more you show up, the more you talk to people, the more they feel like they are not being ignored and they have a role to play. This is true in recruiting to do bad things as much as doing things, recruiting to do good things, right? That truth is there. So we need to understand it and continue to find local organizing ways to keep them involved and engaged in this, not to ask them to change today or give money today, but keep them in mind as they go along because they will actually change their mind. People always change, and you want to be able to create the opportunities for them to change. That's why the
Saji,
long game.
I have I have one question, comment, as we wrap up.
Mhm.
Um, so we're gonna pretend like we're not in a public space, but
Sure.
obviously everything's still very on the record here. I have been, because of my experience with the Women's March and seeing like, it was, I don't want to suggest that it was simple. It was a lot of many
No, of
sleepless
course not.
nights, and I was in charge of like safety and security day of, and like, let me tell you who is not qualified to
Mhm.
be talking to the hazmat team. Like there was a lot of really, really big swings that we were taking,
Mhm.
but sort of in looking back, it was quite simple, going back to the Margaret Mead quote that Jay offered. Um, but and I think we're all dependent, this generation, putting myself under 25 here, um, is all dependent on drafting off of each other. I think there's
Mhm.
so much inspiration that we're getting from each other. I know the pro-abortion movement, it was really important to us in the years after that. We followed in the footsteps of what the women in Mexico had been doing, in Central America, and what they were doing in Argentina. I mean, like, women, the activists in those parts of the country were branding themselves wearing green bandanas. We started wearing green. Like,
Mhm.
it's turned into this, like, there's more opportunity because of the World Wide Web for cross pollination, and for us to borrow each other's ideas and lean on each other. And I do think Americans are like, maybe we can learn some best practices from youth relationships with law enforcement in Uganda, which Shamal talks about often. Are there youth movements, leaders around the world whose voices need to be lifted up? Because when I think about my long term 1 to 5 over the next 80 years, I believe we need a new international organizing body to replace the United Nations. The charter, the conventions, they all are honorable enough, but
Mhm.
the structure of the United Nations, I do not think will stand the test of time, which is fine. Plant a seed, trees die, even if they're 300 years old. Like,
Mhm.
at some point, things have their time has come. And so it is my belief that in this space, in a very public, decentralized way, while you're in DC and on the same area code as, or time zone, like, you could be sitting in Colombo right now and we would have the same thing. Is that I believe that there's opportunities for more conversations amongst youth in spaces like this, where we bring the organization that's working on Medicare, Medicaid, and the one working on Social Security, and the one that's working on the border here, and very publicly saying, "What's the thing we can all get behind?" I think I have some ideas, but to your point, like, shut up and let them talk. And so I'm wondering, one, if you think that there's an opportunity to bring those kinds of people with those kinds of intentions and curiosities into spaces like this, very
Mhm.
sincerely like this, and having very public dialogue around it, which I do think equitizes the debate. Even if we don't have 10 million followers right now, it's still
Yeah.
this conversation is going to last in perpetuity.
Mhm.
Um, so one, do you think that's something we could potentially explore together? And then
Mhm.
2, do you have the 3, the 13, the 35 young people? They don't all have to be the Greta level, but who are the voices in Darfur right now? Who are the voices in who are the voices still in Sri Lanka that are telling the story that need to be told so that we don't forget? Who are the kids that you were talking to in Helsinki?
So the answer to that, or those questions, I think is yes, there's an appetite and there's a need and there's an urgency to that need. And I'll go back to the last thing you said to Helsinki. Just last week, I was working with young people from 52 countries of the OSCE. Why? Because 50 years ago in Helsinki, a group of people came, including some young people, to say, what does our collective security look like? And what was the principles and relationship a state should have with its people and a commitment to its people? That was the birth of the Organization for Security and Cooperation Europe. It started with a conversation in Helsinki 50 years ago. Last week, we had 50 years later a group of young people from all the OSCE member states coming together to think about what is their role over the next 50 years to see this intergenerational way of thinking about the social contract, because the social contract no longer is working for people who are young. And I gave the example of 10 years ago, in August, 10 years ago, where we brought together young people from about 250 young people to Amman, Jordan. And the collective voice of that young generation, the group of people, was to say we want a global framework that starts to see young people as partners in peace and security. And that led to the Kingdom of Jordan leading a process to the Security Council that led on December 9, 2015 to the unanimous adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 2250, for the first time the world body talking about young people as key partners in peace and security issues. So this idea of giving people an opportunity to come together and talk about this, I think is absolutely necessary. The key caveat, though, is that it cannot be too public, because as soon as the public becomes, it's then sometimes it becomes performative, sometimes it becomes restrictive
Mm.
because of safety. The world we live in, it's dangerous. The space young people occupying is shrinking, not expanding. So it cannot at the beginning be public. It has to be private. Then you actually have the freedom to speak without feeling judged or trying to impress.
Hmm.
That's when you get the nuggets and the nuances. Then you can start to build on with them holding hands.
So
And
not
that's what we were
public,
able to
like
do.
having closed door sessions is really important.
I think even a peace process, before it becomes public, there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, one on one, two on one, five on one, 15 on one conversations, till you get people to a common agenda, and then you go public with that common agenda. Because otherwise, what happens, you don't want spears attacking you even before you get off the ground.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I
Right? So
appreciate that.
it's important for people to. So this is where I think the urge to go public is not the right question even, because in the youth movement we didn't ask why are young people joining armed groups, right? Because of the sense of policy panic that was there. What we asked was why are most young people peaceful, and that question led us to creating this agenda. So so it's important to ask this disruptive question. That's another ingredient. What's the disruptive question we are asking? Are we asking the same old questions that we've been asking all these years and not getting to a solid solution? And what could be the disruptive question that can actually open the minds and hearts to what's possible? I think that's a question that we can grapple with as a group of people coming together to think what's the systems we want to build that we can reimagine, and what are some of those questions that we need to be asking that haven't been asked even in the first place. and we need to be listening to those. And that's the starting of another movement, I think. And there are young people hungry, waiting, and we're actually working with them. We actually have access to over 2 million young people, and in a lot of the countries around the world, because we have these key people to more people approach. And these are people in DRC when the recent conflicts was happening and people were being killed and this movement moving up to Kinshasa, we were having people creating hotlines, supporting girls' safety, supporting hotlines for mental health support, and at the same time preventing recruitment into the armed groups. These are young people doing that in DRC. Similarly, we have people in Colombia doing the similar things around during the peace process. When it was stalled, they actually created letters of reconciliation. Over thousands of letters were written to armed combatants to reconcile with them, to bring them back. That was a turning point in the peace process, started by young people, right? So there are numerous places around
Sorry,
the
where
world.
was that? Did you say the
That was in
DRC?
Colombia. The Letters of Reconciliation project was in Colombia. There's a ton of examples I can share with you. We have captured this into case studies. The truth is, there are heroes and heroes who are doing courageous work, keeping their heads down, writing it. They don't publicize this because it's safety. But they're not, this is not about their ego. They want to say, oh, look how cool I am, I'm doing this work. They want to actually do this work. Those are the heroes and heroes you want to bring in because they are the ones who are influential on the long run. They are the ones with feel credit and who have credibility, that people say these are people who are going to be here on the long run. These are not the flyby people who are here for the short term, and people are able to understand it. So yes, to your question, with these nuances to keep in mind, I'd love to be part of that. We've done this before, and this led to big resolutions and movements. This is what we need to do, but we need to have a 6 to 8 year like a runway to actually make something good. I know, but I want to come back to something you said before, Jenna. Pushing you lovingly. This
Please.
idea that you're not a young person. I think that's a misnomer because every place I go to, when I talk at youth events, adults come and say, I'm no longer a young person, but I'm young at heart. That we're missing the point. If as we get older, we have a greater responsibility towards generations who are coming after us, right? So that means that we are constantly youth workers for life if we are actually taking our roles responsibly. So this is not about being in the youth demographic. This is about making sure we understand the youth in a way that enables them to champion things, and we are humble enough to step back and enable them to lead, or be a key holder to give them the key so they can open the door themselves. So people like us as adults are 100% important because this is not a youth movement. This is an intergenerational movement.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like
One of the
that.
mistakes the women's movement made, it was all about women and marginalized men in the process. And I think the youth movement cannot afford to do that. The youth movement is an intergenerational movement because young people are only young for a certain period of time. So by default, you need adults. And that's why this is important to think about how do we do this intergenerationally over the longer period of time to create a systems that we want to imagine now. So don't say you're no longer young. You're saying you
I'm still
champion
part of the
more.
youth movement, guys.
I know. You
We
get a
can
role to
talk.
play. We all have a role to
We
play.
can talk about my vanity related to youth another time. It happens to be a subject that occupies too much of my brain space on a daily basis. I do want to offer any final thoughts. I know that Jay has been here. There's one person who's definitively part of the youth movement who I have not heard from at all, and he is always firing the most thorny and disruptive of all questions. But in any of the final moments, I don't know if there's any questions. But Saji, if you're open to it, we would love to have you back. I mean, we would love to
I'd
have.
love to do it.
I think the story about um one of the things that we've been thinking about here is whether or not we can explore any truth and conciliation, honoring the language of Mark Charles, who's a indigenous activist here in the States, about doing like a virtual truth and conciliation type conversation on the public. I hear your point about what are the things that need to be private because we spend so much time performing for ourselves. I think fishing for the disruptive questions publicly could be fascinating and urgent because it's
Mhm,
something I know I need help with. Not just related to the systems, but
mhm,
I do think the next time I'm headed on air to talk about the state of the Democratic Party, I might call you for some talking points because I do think we have a unique moment to
mhm.
catapult um, organizing and efficiency. And I don't know where I know Jay has it. The systems come before the network, that comes before the movement, the blah blah blah. Like
Think like a
yes,
system, act like a network, lead like a movement.
yeah. But the way that we have been taught to think is outdated, no? I mean, if we think about the system pays homage to the older. The system pays homage to the people who can cut the checks for the movements. I
Mhm,
mean, we didn't even get into we didn't even get into the cost behind some of these
mhm.
things. I mean, and what is really the financial cost and the dependency that we have on resources and things like that. But I don't know. I still
But
double down on Sesame Street being the catalyst, which will hopefully end up
uh,
leading to.
I grew up watching Sesame
Did
Street
you?
when I was in Sri Lanka, when we didn't have television, even up the
Did
road, it was
you?
the television shop that sold television. We couldn't afford it. Crowded, 20, 30 people sitting outside on the road watching Sesame Street growing up. That was part of my experience in Sri
And
Lanka.
that
So cut
was
full circle now. I'm coming full circle back to Sri Lanka to say that was a pivotal moment in my life because that's part of how I learned about the West. I learned about language and it's about how to think through these issues through the characters. And then storytelling was part of our culture growing up. So we were integrated. But it was a cultural moment. Sit out there on the streets in the
um,
evening in darkness watching Sesame Street 7 or 7:30 p.m. when it came on, and we were watching it, and it was a collective effort of watching and laughing and joking about what
is
we
it
were
fair to
listening.
say that Sesame Street I'm really gonna push you here, and this comes down putting on my marketing hat for a second. Is it fair to say that what you learned on Sesame Street helped you when you had to make that choice between good and evil? Recognizing that there was a lot of things that contributed to your choosing the off ramp.
So I would say Sesame Street was one of the influential things. The other influential things were also as equally important as the Sesame Street because what Sesame Street was doing is working through my mind and creating visuals of what it can look like, right? And then the statements, the comments, the advice from my parents were auditory. The visual and auditory together combined with the behavior that I was seeing is what made me help choose between these two things. So you need both. The power of television is shows you what you want to see. The power of radio is imagine what you can be because you're only seeing you're hearing something and puts the listener into a place where they can fantasize and imagine themselves in it because it's only auditory. But then the key messages that they hear actually is important to juxtapose them so that way you can create a visual fantasy, right? Games do that. Here we are using a platform. Games do that really well too, but it's still visual. But the auditory is as powerful as sometimes the visual in a way that is necessary to bring in. So to me, Sesame Street was one, but then the all the other things were part of that decision too. It's not one thing, it's always
Yeah,
many
right.
that give up to this. Sorry, I can't give you one answer.
No, it's totally fine. I'm not actually looking for that, but just to say that it was a non-zero factor in helping you
Mhm.
make that decision to not choose violence
100%.
is
100%.
helpful. And in a time when Sesame Street is
Yeah,
working really hard to justify its need in the world, I will pass
100.
those
Yeah.
comments on. Saji, Director of Children and Youth Programs at Search for Common Ground, thank you so much. Thank you so much for including me and inviting me into the youth movement. I really appreciate it. And let's
Stay
keep
as long as
talking.
you can. Stay for 100
You
years.
you don't have a damn choice, Jenna. Um, but we would love to continue to have the conversation with you, and I hope that your wheels might start spinning on other voices, young people to bring into this conversation, to bring into the space, to start hunting
Any
for the
day,
disruptive
anytime,
questions. Let's do it. Let's do it and
100%,
see how we can spread it much further and much wider.
100%.
All right,
Thank
Saji,
you for having me.
thank you so
Thank you
much.
for
I'm going
having
to
me.
actually technically ask you to hold on, but we're going to awkwardly pretend like we're saying goodbye to everybody, and Jay is going
Bye.
to take
Thank
care
you
of
very
business.
much.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for your comments.
Thank you for your comments.